You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 31st of December 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, senior leaders from Syria and Ukraine gather to assess a common strategy. We'll examine why the meeting's happening as the fight for Syria's influence begins.
The message is clear. We are with you. We are ready to help the Syrian people because Ukraine is interested in stable Syria.
Also ahead.
We've got the situation under control and we have to continue work together vigilantly to make sure that our critical infrastructure is not damaged.
That was the Finnish president there as NATO says it'll increase its presence in the Baltic Sea after fears for the security of undersea cables. We'll look at what can be done. We'll go through the newspapers and hear the latest fashion and retail news too. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. A court in South Korea has approved an arrest warrant for the former president Yoon Suk-yeol after he was impeached and suspended from power for imposing martial law. Chinese hackers have broken into the US Treasury Department systems, and Ukraine and Russia have carried out a new exchange of prisoners of war. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories. But first, Ukraine, a country with enough of its own intense pressures, has said it will support the new authorities in Syria who ousted Bashar al-Assad. The Ukrainian foreign minister met Syria's de facto leader yesterday during a visit to Damascus. And to tell us more, I'm joined now by Hannah McCarthy, foreign correspondent, and Jenny Mather, senior lecturer in international politics at Aberystwyth University. A very good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So let's begin with you, Hannah. What do we know? What was said in this meeting?
Sure. So what we're hearing is a kind of lot of discussion around your strategic partnerships and kind of general language, and that's what's been said to the press. So I think obviously now that there is a new regime in Damascus, there is a kind of jockeying for influence over Syria, and Ukraine's been quite strategic about kind of seizing these kind of moments to highlight its cause, to kind of be at the forefront of that. And I think that's what you're seeing with this meeting between Ukraine's foreign minister Andriy Sybiha and Ahmed al-Shara. I think what was also discussed was that Ukraine was giving a large supply of wheat to Syria. This was done on a kind of humanitarian basis. The second thing I think which was interesting was there was a discussion around a common understanding of the future for Syria. There's some kind of tensions around this. Syria clearly wants to kind of appease a number of different players, but there's obviously tensions between what some of those players want. Ukraine obviously wants to encourage Syria to close down the military bases that Russia has in Syria. At the same time, Syria, the new regime has said that our arms and our weapons are all from Russia. We want to have relations with Russia. So there's also certainly tensions in what will have been discussed between the new regime in Damascus and the Ukrainian foreign minister.
It is a big step, isn't it, for Ukraine, and a very clever move, isn't it, by the Ukrainians, Jenny, to talk about how they can try very quickly to jockey for positions inside Syria, which, as Hannah has just mentioned, traditionally has been very closely tied to Russia.
Absolutely. I think, Zelensky has been very, very smart in getting in so quickly and trying to, establish the basis for good relationships with the new powers that be in Syria, partly for its own sake, partly to make common cause with another community and nation that has been so badly affected by Russian military action. And I think partly also to rub Putin's nose in it, that he wasn't able to save the regime that he originally intervened in 2015 to support. And now Ukraine has an opportunity to, create good relations with that country.
And coming back to you, Hannah, how does Syria now try and do this? Because it needs to have strong ties with Russia still, given the fact that there are Russian military bases there, that as far as we know, the former president is being given a harbour by Russia. And strategically, it is absolutely essential for Russia to keep its ports in Tartus and Latakia.
You're right. So from Russia's point of view, not having these military bases is a real issue for it in terms of continuing its influence in Africa. At the same time, it's very uncertain about how it's going to actually negotiate its continuing presence in Syria. It looks like kind of all sorts of things are suddenly going to be up for negotiation, because it's not just about the new regime in Damascus. It's also about, a new Trump presidency starting in January. It's also about how this interplays with a possible deal between Ukraine and Russia. So it's not just about Syria. It's also about how it feeds into, I guess, the kind of, broader chess board that's in play at the moment.
Indeed. And just one of the key parts of this chessboard, Jenny, is something that Hannah mentioned a moment ago, is this astonishing exchange now, and indeed delivery now, that the Ukraine has now promised that it will send wheat, given the fact that it is a country in itself in the middle of nearly 3 years of a Russian invasion. It still finds itself able to send food to Syria, and this is not just a sort of a humanitarian or a sort of a nice gesture, is it? It's an indication that A, Ukraine can still export its wheat very successfully, but B, it's having to replace something that, by arguably, Russia now can't send wheat to Syria.
Well, it's interesting because one of the earliest moves that Russia made to try and damage Ukraine's economy was to blockade its ports and to stop it from exporting agricultural produce, especially wheat. And, in this 2.5, nearly 3 years that's happened since the mass invasion, Ukraine has been very, successful in evading those measures and in getting its wheat out to market. And so, it's in a much stronger position now than it has been since the start of the war to reassert itself on the global stage as the provider of food, not only for itself, but for other countries around the world.
And in this context, Hannah, you get the fact that this Ukrainian visit is a really big victory for Syria as they now seek international recognition. How much power and influence do you believe that the Syrians currently hold?
Well, I guess internally, obviously they have successfully ousted Assad, and domestically that comes with a lot of influence. But internationally, they remain under heavy sanctions. They remain, I guess, in a kind of position where the international community has not yet embraced them. There is kind of tentative kind of meetings going on. The first foreign visit is due to be in Saudi Arabia. There are kind of small kind of positive kind of steps being taken by the international community, but certainly Syria needs the international community to at some point remove sanctions. It will need foreign aid in order to assist with the returns of Syrians from abroad. So Syria is not in a power of influence yet over the international community, but it's certainly going to be trying to prove itself in the coming months and years.
And Jenny, how much will Russia try to make sure that it retains the influence that it has enjoyed so long under Bashar al-Assad? Because we've heard the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that the status of Russia's military bases will be the subject of negotiations with the new leadership in Damascus. They have dismissed this trip by the Ukrainian team as an extension of the West's strategy to undermine Russian influence. They are trying to keep a toehold and put a lid on any kind of external influences coming into Damascus, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're going to try to do what they can to retain, the bases, retain access to the bases and retain some kind of a good relationship with Syria going forward. But the problem that they face, of course, is that it was Russian military aircraft that has bombed, cities in Syria and killed many, many Syrians and destroyed the infrastructure there. So they've got a sort of a large hill to climb to try and establish good relationship with the new powers that be.
Jenny Mathers and Hannah McCarthy, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries. over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 9:10 a.m. in Helsinki, 7:10 a.m. here in London. Now, NATO has said it will enhance its presence in the Baltic Sea. It follows a meeting yesterday to discuss the security of undersea cables. So how much of a risk do Russian ships pose to critical infrastructure in Europe? And not just from the Russian Navy, but from so-called ghost ships, whose aim is to circumvent sanctions. Well, Petri Bertsov is Monocle's Helsinki correspondent. A very good morning to you, Petri. Welcome back to Monocle Radio.
Good morning, Emma.
So this all stems from what happened on Christmas Day. Explain what happened in the Baltic Sea.
Yes, sure. So on Christmas Day, a tanker by the name of Eagle S was found having damaged a electricity connection between Finland and Estonia called Estlink 2. And this is the third such incident over the course of the past 12 months. And the Finnish authorities, Finnish border guard, Finnish army, Finnish police, quite rapidly discovered that it had been this particular oil tanker, and then proceeded to actually, in quite a startling fashion, kind of a straight out of a movies looking scene, to board this tanker from helicopters and basically take it under control and bring it to the Finnish shore.
Now, the Eagle S is part of what's known as a shadow fleet, or a ghost ship. They are used to transport Russian oil to circumvent sanctions. What more do we know about this so-called shadow fleet?
So, as you said, Russia uses these to circumvent the sanctions, but they're not Russian ships per se. So these are usually like Eagle S, for example, was sailing under the flag of the Cook Islands, I believe, which is part of New Zealand, and it was owned by a company based in the United Arab Emirates. Quite often, these tankers are owned by third parties and countries, not Russia. And it started off as a small initiative by Russia to circumvent the sanctions, but now researchers believe that nearly 70% of Russia's oil is actually being transported by these shadow tankers, and they're quite often in quite poor shape, approaching the end of their life as vessels, decades old, and often not insured. So they in addition to the sabotage that they some of them have carried out, there are also just security risks because, of course, they transport large amounts of oil, and they're in very bad shape. And
what is the reaction by Finland to all this, given the fact that there are accusations being made that the world has been slow in picking up the risk from this so-called shadow fleet?
Yeah, so Finland, as I said, reacted quite rapidly this time. Even the Estonian authorities said that they were quite impressed by how fast Finland reacted. And it was clearly meant as a show of force, this military maneuver to take control of the vessel. But then it didn't take long for the Prime Minister Petteri Orpo to hold a press conference where he said that Finland will respond decisively. Then President Alexander Stubb also said that he held meetings with the NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, as well as various EU leaders to find solutions to this. And as you said, NATO has already reacted to this by dispatching more vessels, and EU is also on EU level. They proposed new sanctions targeting this dark fleet, and then finally Alexander Stubb, Finland's president, said that we also need to find solutions based on international maritime law. Because a lot of these vessels, of course, they're sailing in international waters. So when they're sailing in international waters, sovereign countries cannot intervene. So Stubb suggested that we somehow find new legal ways to address this issue.
And what's been the reaction in Finland, given the fact that the undersea cables were destroyed simply by, and it is assumed that an anchor was dragged over them and severed them. Yet they are absolutely crucial infrastructure links, aren't they?
Yes, they are. I mean, in this particular cable was not, it was not critical for Finland's electricity supply, but it was still important. But of course, we have to remember the earlier cables and pipelines that have been damaged. They've been quite important. The gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia, data cables as well. Not to speak of the Nord Stream pipeline, which was also destroyed earlier. So these are important pipelines, and there's talk of how we can protect them. But then there's also talk of, there was a piece in Helsingin Sanomat yesterday looking at if we can somehow build these pipelines between friendlier countries, so between Finland and Sweden, for example, as opposed to sort of going straight through the Baltic Sea. So there's been quite a stark reaction. But I think overall the mood in Finland is that, this was to be expected. This is the kind of operations, this kind of hybrid operations that Russia does. And the solution, many Finns believe that, we have to keep our head cool, because if we get provoked and if we get scared, then we're playing by Russia's playbook basically then.
Indeed. And how much does NATO then play a reassuring part in this?
It does play a big role, and now that NATO has dispatched vessels there, it does offer reassurances to Finland. But at the end of the day, I mean, the Baltic Sea is a large area of water, and the pipelines also are very, very long. So you cannot have, the solution is not to have permanent sort of patrols. It would just take up too much of the resources. So there has to be a sort of a legal solution to this, not just the patrols, which are a temporary sort of show of force.
Petri Bertsov, thank you so much for joining us on the line from Helsinki. You're listening to The Globalist.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
The time is just nudging, 18 minutes past 7 here in London. A very good morning to you if you just tuned in. This is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio, Simon Brooke. Happy Christmas, Simon.
Happy Christmas and Happy New Year, is it not? It's probably a bit early to say it, but...
It's the last Globalist of 2024, so I suppose we're not going to get another chance to say it until next year. So very Happy New Year to you when it comes. You've had the brilliant job of having to go through the papers in the kind of the interregnum, that glorious period between Christmas and New Year, when there is, in fact, an awful lot of very strong, powerful news. But at the same time, you can also hear the scraping of a barrel being made in the second half of papers. So what have we picked up on today?
Well, the Daily Telegraph is one of a number of news outlets reporting on the announcement by the US Treasury that Chinese hackers have managed to access workstations in the government agency, the Treasury. According to the paper, the incident took place after the hackers compromised a third-party software provider. So I imagine there are some senior US Treasury officials who are looking at their cybersecurity people in the eye and saying, what on earth happened there? The US Treasury has described the hack as a major cybersecurity incident. And interesting, the Telegraph puts this into some kind of context by reminding us that this latest revelation comes as US officials are continuing to grapple with the fallout of a massive Chinese cyber espionage campaign known as Salt Typhoon, which apparently gave officials in Beijing access to private texts, phone conversations, all kinds of details from a number of US citizens. So real concern, I think, in Washington at the moment about the impact that this latest attack might have had.
It indeed. I mean, the scale of the attack seems to be quite widespread. I think there are unclassified documents that were seen. So, hopefully, luckily, the stuff that really matters has not been spotted. But a top White House official, according to The Telegraph, says that the number of telecommunications companies confirmed to have been affected by the hack has now risen to 9.
Yeah, absolutely.
That suddenly takes it outside the State Department, doesn't it?
It does, exactly. It gets bigger. And also, I think this is just an interesting illustration of the challenge that the West faces. How do you do business with China? Despite the fact that China is carrying out these cyber attacks. It's particularly relevant here in the UK because the newish Labour government has signalled that it would like to cultivate closer relations with Beijing. But as I say, how do you do that? On the one hand, do business with Beijing, take action on issues such as climate change, but at the same time, almost regarding them as a hostile force.
Let's move on to an article in the New York Times that you wanted to draw our attention to. Elon Musk has decamped to a cottage at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah, it's not. I mean, it's a cottage that costs £2,000 a week, so it's not. I don't suppose he's doing his own cooking there.
But it's £2,000 a night. Actually,
a night. Sorry, a night.
For £2,000 a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Slumming it.
Absolutely. So, but then Elon Musk is the richest man in the world, of course, and as the paper reminds us, he's also the president-elect's most important donor, most influential social media promoter, and a key advisor on policy and personnel. But now, as well as policy and personnel, it's proximity, it turns out. According to the New York Times, Musk has been at this cottage, which is just very, very near to Trump's own residence at the Mar-a-Lago property. He's been there apparently for most of the time since Election Day. And that means, of course, that he can pop in at any time, just have a word with the president-elect, and they can discuss policy and what might happen after January next year. So interesting, this idea very much of Trump being the medieval king, if you like, with his courtiers all around him.
Indeed, everybody is talking about the court of Donald Trump. And the interesting thing that the New York Times mentions is the fact that they're not just he's not just decamped out in the gardens. He's got his Musk's employees from various businesses and now getting involved in the transition to power. It says they've been vetting prospective candidates for senior administration jobs. They've been part of interviews at the transition headquarters at West Palm Beach, and they're sitting in on phone calls with foreign leaders. And it is astonishing how suddenly the democratic structures of government no longer seem to be remotely relevant to what's just about to happen on January the 20th.
It is. It's a unique way of running government, but this whole idea that Trump is there. Some people have said, like a bit like a mafia don or whatever, with his advisors all around him. I think what is interesting about this story is it shows how close Musk and Trump are at the moment. But of course, we're all waiting for this bromance to explode. Already we've seen tension between the two men, that because Elon Musk, for instance, is in favour of extending the visa scheme for talented workers to come into the US, especially in the tech field, obviously something of interest to Elon Musk, whereas Donald Trump is very much against it. So close in so many ways, literally, physically in this way. But of course, we're all watching, waiting for that explosion, that division to come.
Let's move on to a wonderful article. It's that time of the year when archives are declassified and we suddenly find ourselves reading what we possibly suspected might be going on. But in the case of Le Monde, it is an amazing article about the number of French politicians who were in the service of the Soviet KGB.
Yes, this is a continuing interest in France, this close connection between the Soviet Union and senior, as you say, politicians, policy makers, civil servants, whatever. So Le Monde has a series looking at what is revealed by the declassified or released documents of Vasily Metrikhin, who is an archivist for the KGB, and he defected to the UK in 1992. And I thought this is quite interesting. For instance, one of the people who's revealed in these archives is Pierre Soudrou, who was the youngest leader of the French resistance during the Second World War, and then went on to have roles in government under Charles de Gaulle and Georges Pompidou in the 60s and 70s. And I think it's interesting. Soudrou is obviously one of those activists who took a decision back then and just came to the conclusion that the Soviet Union, whatever its demerits, whatever its problems, whatever, was the less of two evils, and it was morally worth backing Stalin as a way of defeating Hitler.
Finally, in the Financial Times, the most important question of the year, while everybody is getting geared up for tonight, they asked the question, who killed the rave? I have to ask you, Simon Brooke, did you rave?
I did back in this is so embarrassing. Many years ago. I'm the world's worst dancer, but I went to nightclubs, London, Ibiza, New York. In fact, I remember just going to one New York nightclub for about 20 minutes, just to say I'd been there. But at least I went there. Increasingly, unfortunately, it turns out people are not going to nightclubs. So yeah, the Financial Times has this story looking at how late night dancing is falling across the world, from Berlin to New York. Clubbers in the world's party capitals are heading home earlier, it turns out. And they give the example, for instance, of the Watergate Club, which is an iconic, long-standing Berlin venue that's become the latest victim of what is described in Germany as Clubsterben, club death. Sounds really grim, doesn't it?
Sounds terrible. And what are the reasons for this? I mean, it's a lovely article that obviously the Financial Times has had to put its party hat on, given the day.
Exactly.
And an absolute top marks to the FT for actually turning something into a pretty serious story. But it's to do with what? COVID-19 meant that licensing rules got a bit shorter.
Yeah, that
and also
had an influence.
People go out during the day. I mean, as I stayed up past my bedtime too.
Goodness me.
And I find, yes, and who would have thought? But the idea now that people don't go out at night is slightly strange, I think, perhaps to people who did.
Yeah, apparently it is cost pressures. It's declining tourism, according to the Financial Times, waning enthusiasm from Gen Z, and the rise of music festivals, I think, is quite interesting. The other thing that I'm going to explore this as a possible story as well, is I was talking to a young person and asking, well, she was talking about where she met her boyfriend. It wasn't at a nightclub, it was at a gym. And I was also looking, research according to the BBC shows that here in London, it's now easier to find a 24-hour gym than a club. So perhaps the socialising is less taking place among, I was going to say thumping music, but you probably get that at a gym anyway, don't you? But at a club anyway. But it's interesting that actually gyms have now taken over for clubs as the place to socialise and meet a future partner.
I'm not entirely sure who's going to find their next partner sliding up and down on a reformer Pilates bed, but we'll give it that. Simon Brooke, thank you so much for joining me in the studio, and a Happy New Year to you. The time here in London is 7:27 a.m. Let's have a look at what else we're keeping an eye on today with the headlines. A court in South Korea has approved an arrest warrant for the former president Yoon Suk-yeol after he was impeached and suspended from power for imposing martial law. The warrant comes after Yoon ignored 3 summonses to appear for questioning over the past 2 weeks. His team has called the warrant illegal and invalid. Chinese hackers have broken into the US Treasury Department's systems. The breach occurred in early December, and it's understood the hackers accessed employees' workstations and some unclassified documents. The Chinese embassy in Washington has described the accusations as a smear. And Ukraine and Russia have carried out a new exchange of prisoners of war. The two sides have brought home a combined total of more than 300 former captives. Kyiv brought home 189 former captives. The Russian ministry said 150 Russian servicemen were returning home. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Finally, on today's programme, a look at the fashion and retail for 2025. Joining me on the line is Rebecca Tay, retail expert and brand consultant. A very good morning to you, Rebecca.
Good morning, Emma, and Happy New Year's Eve.
Happy New Year's Eve and Happy New Year when it comes. What tidbits have you got from the world of fashion and retail as we close off 2024?
As we close off 2024, I think 2025 is going to be quite similar. It's not looking overly positive, I'm afraid to say. I think the market is looking kind of quite bad. Consumer sentiment is still looking like it is going to continue being bad, and some experts even say that industry conditions will worsen. So it's not the rosiest picture, unfortunately. But there is some interesting things. I think there's been so many musical chairs happening over the last few months. So there will be some new collections, new creative directors at the major fashion houses that I think we'll have to look forward to. They won't be showing their collections until February at the earliest, and then most of them will show in September. So a little bit of a wait, but definitely some interesting things to be coming on the creative side, at least.
Thank you very much for that. Let's have a look at some of the stories which are sort of immediately pressing with this. In New York, they've been sort of signing bills of a Bill of Rights by the dozens, and one of them affects the working conditions for models.
Yes, so this came in just before Christmas, which was quite good news. It's called the Fashion Workers Act, and it was signed into law, so it will come into effect actually next June. So again, it won't be in effect for New York Fashion Week in February, but it does protect models. So it does mean that they'll be protected from exploitation, harassment, abuse, and I think AI as well. So models who are, there's no risk of their images being changed by AI to then be portrayed and shown as somebody else, for example. There was a really horrific incident of a girl who walked on a runway and then she saw the images and her complete skin color had been changed. So anything like that in the state of New York, at least, now has to be written into consent for that to happen. And then generally, I think there's a lot more kind of transparency around contracts, expenses, what models are being paid, and a lot more just general kind of transparency around the industry there.
This transparency and this legal framework now that in theory supports them. I mean, to what degree do we believe that this will actually be enacted?
I think, as one kind of commentator said, if you're a little bit worried about this, then you have to really look at your business overall. So if you're kind of engaging in dodgy behavior, if you're sort of hiring models, kind of going around the back channels and not going through their agencies, or if you're pretending to be an agency and trying to hire models and put them forward, then this definitely will affect you. Presumably and hopefully the bigger fashion houses won't be affected because they are doing things properly. But it is something, it's a little bit more of a barrier to the big agencies. So Elite, Next, IMG, they all have a little bit more paperwork to do because they actually have to register in New York now to be able to have their models hired for upcoming fashion weeks, but it's a good thing, I think.
Let's move on to LVMH has been shopping. It's bought itself a rather nice little house in Cannes.
Yes, it has. This is sort of went under the radar, actually. So very nice house, a 50 million euro house, in fact. So it's in a historic villa. It was a 12-bedroom property, and I think it was built in the 20s, so Art Deco in style. They're saying that it's going to be used for kind of brand events and engagements. Obviously, Cannes is a big film festival in May, but they also have the Cannes Lion. So they're saying that it will be used by any of their houses. So Louis Vuitton, which is their biggest fashion house, obviously, Christian Dior, Moet, Bulgari. So they're saying that it will be for kind of brand engagement. So whether or not that means they'll be flying editors and influencers and creators to this house to sort of host them, or whether or not they'll actually just be sort of, using it as a background for shoots, for example. But it is actually interesting because a lot of the fashion houses are investing in real estate. So it's also kind of a diversification, I think, of their assets.
And it does make total sense business-wise in terms of that idea of hosting something which is entirely part of your brand.
Yes, exactly. So I think you can't just rely on people to engage with, images on social media now. They want to sort of be there. They want to really engage with the brand. They want to sort of know what the brand stands for. And a lot of that comes from kind of these activations or these events where you can see people engaging and see what the kind of mood of the event is. And exactly, that comes from sort of seeing what these events and attending the events if you're lucky enough.
Let's finally move to a wonderful story about that moment when you're not entirely sure whether someone's stolen a design, but it looks very much like it, and suddenly everybody wants a bit of the copy.
Yes, exactly. So dupes have been big, I think, for the last few years, thanks to sort of social media and TikTok. But this one's quite funny. They're calling it the Workin because it's the Walmart Birkin. It's on Walmart's marketplace site. So very similar to kind of an Amazon model where people can post things that they're selling. A lot of sort of Chinese sellers are selling goods. And exactly, it looks like an Hermes Birkin. It's very, very, very similar in design. It obviously doesn't have any of the logo stamps, the kind of trademark gold hardware, and it probably isn't legal from Hermes's point of view, but it is still there at the moment.
Okay, and there are queues to get it. Rebecca Tate, yes. Thank you so much for joining us on the programme. And that's all the time we have for today's show. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and also to our producers Hassan Anderson and Desiree Bandley, and our studio manager is Flynn Simons. After the headlines, more music is on the way. I'll be back live at midday here in London to bring you the briefing, and the Globalist returns at the same time tomorrow, I should say. It's a special edition given it's going to be New Year's Day. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thanks for listening. Happy New Year.